Yay! Welcome to, oh my God, this is the slot of my dreams. Really, it is. I'm Karen Lensman. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a doctor, an epidemiologist, and a writer. And I have with me the most amazing special guest star ever.
And it's 8 a.m. where I am, so this is not the time slot of my dreams, although it is a fun panel concept. I'm Shonen Megwier. I am every real epidemiologist's worst nightmare, which is I am the hobby epidemiologist, because I learned all the virology for fun before we wound up in a real-life global pandemic. I write books about global pandemics under the name Mira Grant.
You write good books that I can't nitpick, which is a good thing. So we are going to talk about pandemics and about writing pandemics, and you can send us questions down there on the chat window. Please, if you can phrase them in English, it would be awesome, because then I wouldn't have to translate things. And it's hard enough because I'm so excited to have Shonen here. And I'm like, oh my God, it's so awesome. Okay, so would you like to start with a favorite, what is your favorite pandemic question?
My favorite real-world pandemic, which you and I have discussed at length, was the Black Death in Europe. It lasted for centuries. It completely rewrote the way that society worked in that region. And it was a really great example of why you don't pursue herd immunity concepts with novel pandemics. You know, something like the chicken pox, which when left to rage uncontrolled through a population still kills people. We have had literally centuries to get used to, and it kind of knows how our bodies work on that. It's not even instinctual, it's just hard-coded in viral level. And our bodies know how chickenpox works because we've encountered the antibodies through our parents. So we can catch it, but we are less likely to have a really, really negative reaction than we are to something completely new. The Black Death hit Europe. It was 100% novel. Nobody's body knew how to deal with it. Nobody sociologically knew how to deal with it. And millions of people died over the course of decades. You know, it was a complete rewrite for the region. And that makes it a really good fictionalizing pandemic, because it was big and dramatic and it just never went away. I don't want to do that one in real life. I'm not enjoying our current Black Death LARP. But that is my favorite real world pandemic.
I'm sorry, you just made me spill my coffee. And although this is my fifth coffee today, but still, yeah, that's definitely one of my favorites as well. First of all, because it was in history, which means it was over. Also, we have this thing, antibiotics now, which means it won't come back. And also because it was the first time they ever tried to quarantine someone. We do have in the Bible, guidelines of how to quarantine someone to make sure they're not gonna, spread a new disease into the population. But in 1342, it was the first time they tried to do it like in a real global European central way, to actually quarantine sailors, to quarantine newcomers, to make sure the disease won't spread. And it lasted for 400 years. I think this is what most people forget. People look at the first wave of the pandemic and they're like, okay, well, it lasted 4 years, 5 years. No, it lasted 400 years. We see the outcomes of it in literature, in society, in religion, everywhere. And I think one of the most interesting thing about, interesting in an academic point of view, the most interesting thing about the current pandemic is to try and to see how everything we thought we knew is completely wrong. And
what I'm finding interesting about the current pandemic in the same academic sense, and I don't know, do you have the same problem I do? I really love diseases. I started studying them for fun because I thought they were interesting and I was less afraid of them if I understood them. So I wanted to know, how does rabies work? Why does that go through? Do the prophylactic shots actually help? What is smallpox? Why is it so bad that it's the only disease we've ever actually eliminated? I love diseases They're so interesting. They're so exciting. I frequently get told I have to chill out and stop sounding so happy about the death toll of Zika.
No, people shouldn't say that to you. They're wrong.
I know, right?
Right.
I have no chill. But so we've got this novel disease going on. We're learning new stuff about it every day. And it's so exciting. It's terrifying and horrible. And I'm locked in my house, but it's exciting at the same time. And people are like, oh my God, I never knew you were a monster all the freaking time. But,
like, sorry.
Yeah, no, the thing I'm finding most interesting is our closest parallel to this specific pandemic in America, which is where I'm located, I'm on the west coast of the United States, is the 1918 flu pandemic, which a surprising number of people have learned about through dealing with COVID-19. You know, I always thought that the there's a catchy little song. It was the flu pandemic and it swept the whole world wide. It cut soldiers and civilians and they died. Like everyone knows about the flu pandemic, but apparently no one did. And we had a whole thing with mask wearing in America, like with anti-mask protests. And
now?
In 1918.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we had anti-mask protests. We had civic mask laws. We had cities trying to enforce mask mandates. And we had people insisting in 1918 that it was a violation of their freedom, even as doctors were saying, no, we have found you put on masks, infection rates drop. So we learned this the hard way almost exactly 100 years ago. And now we're playing the same exact song all over again.
It's so we have, lucky for us, we have mandate laws. So when the pandemic hit, we could implement a real law that was legislated in 1940 that allowed us doctors to quarantine people, to impose vaccination, to declare lockdown. We had the law by our side, and so I was like, yay for us. I can implement what I studied, because when I studied when I did my public health degree, I studied about this law and I was like, yay, I can implement that. Sorry? Chats. Okay, cool. Shannon right here that her computer just made a buzzing noise and I stopped making sound, which is weird. So she's gonna drop off and rejoin in a minute. I'm gonna take advantage ואני אגיד בזמן ששונן לא כאן, אני עוברת לעברית רק כי אני מנחשת שרובנו פה בדוברי עברית, עד ששונן תצליח להתחבר מחדש. אתם מוזמנים לשלוח שאלות בצ'אט, אנחנו נקבל אותם דרך הפקת תוכן בצ'אט הפנימי, אתם מוזמנים לכתוב הערות תומכות, וסליחה, אלה מכם שלא מכירים את שונן, שכחתי להגיד שהספר של הכל לב ודלת יצא בהוצאת נובה, ואתם, do we have Shonen again? Are you here again? Yay, you're here. No, but now you're muted.
I'm unmuted now. Yeah, yes, you said Israel has the mandate law and my computer went and then away. It's like, thank you, NIS.
I was just doing a plugin for your book, Every Heart is a Doorway, that was translated to Hebrew by Didi Hanoch and is available in Nova Publishing, and you can get it. So I'm going to say it in Hebrew now, and you won't know which book I'm talking about. אז אתם מוזמנים לנסות להשיג את כל לב ודלת, הוא זמין אונליין בהוצאת נובה, והוא זמין גם אצל יואב ספרים וכל דוכני הספרים הסטנדרטיים יותר. Okay, let's go back to Hebrew and our wonderful law that I learned about that allows doctors to impose quarantine and to impose vaccination and everything. And it was very interesting. So I work as an epidemiologist in the epidemiology department in the Ministry of Health, which is just where you want to be if you're disease enthusiast. I want to say that. Is that a thing I can say?
Yeah.
And to see the pandemic unfolds and to see how you implement a law and to see how you do things and how you try to make people understand that, like you said, masks are good for you. You know, being far away from other people is good for you. And that reminds me of, I'm trying to remember if you started it or if you just responded to someone about how the current pandemic destroys everything we thought we knew about writing pandemics, because nothing makes sense anymore.
I think I was part of that conversation. It doesn't destroy the virology. What it destroys is the human sense of story. Humans have this idea that everything is going to form a linear and logical story, and people will behave in a linear and logical way. And if I say to you, I have a disease here that kills 3% of the people who catch it, most of them being older or having any kind of pre-existing condition. 40% of people have a pre-existing condition, so the chances are very strong that your odds are higher than that 3 out of 100. It's airborne, and if you catch it and live, you may have permanent organ damage, which means you now have pre-existing conditions and fall into that 40%. So if you catch it again, you could die. You know, I give you the very basic, actually kind of optimistic facts. You know, 3% is the very optimistic number because it assumes a perfect healthcare system. If I tell you all that, you'd think I don't want to catch that would be more important than getting your hair cut, or more important than here in the United States, going out to have a big Christmas dinner with people. You know, this year, 2020 was the first year I have not spent Rosh Hashanah with my family in New York in almost a decade. And yet when we hit Thanksgiving and Christmas, which are the big American Christian holidays, people started yelling about how COVID can't be allowed to cancel the holidays. And we have things like Britain saying that they're going to declare an armistice with the virus. They're going to lift all restrictions for the week of Christmas because it'll be just like the armistice in World War II. That's not how any of this works. You know, if I had written this book, I would have gotten lambasted up one side and down the other for having people behaving unrealistically during a global pandemic. But what we've really learned is that people don't act realistically during a global pandemic. They're under stress, they're experiencing trauma, they don't make good choices. They actually behave, the closest model we've got is the bleeding illness raid back on World of Warcraft, which is when they had an uncontrolled pandemic break out on one of the servers, and you got people behaving in all the ways that we're seeing with COVID now. But I have friends that are working in American ICUs as care nurses who have literally had patients telling them COVID was a hoax as they were trying to intubate.
Well,
and yeah, so the level of unreality and disconnect is kind of fascinating. It makes a pandemic book that I strongly disliked the most realistic pandemic book I've read in years, which was Paul Tremblay's Survivor's Song. It came out earlier this year, right after the start of COVID. It is about a form of fast-moving hyperrabies. And the entire book is about this heroic doctor who is breaking quarantine and exposing the rest of the continent to the hyperrabies after it's been contained, because her best friend, who is 9 months pregnant, has been bitten and she has to save the pregnant woman. Everything about this book offended me as somebody who studies diseases for fun, as somebody who really respects quarantine, and as someone who writes pandemics. But it's beautifully written, and it may be the most realistic response to pandemic stress that we've seen in a long, long time. You know, we are going to have to tone down the rationality and really assume a lot more people going, especially in a country like America. I don't know if Israel has the attitude of, we are only a community after I got what's mine, which is very much a thing here.
Yeah.
You know.
No, everything is perfect here.
You have scorpions. I love that about you.
Right. We do have scorpions here. Unfortunately, they don't get to vote as to who's wearing a mask, who has to stay, you know, away. Okay. Good. I like that. I like that we get a question that is very close to what I was going to ask you. So here's a question from the audience. Even for people writing speculative fiction, it's very hard to ignore the pandemic. So do you think science fiction advances from plague to plague? What do you think?
I think it absolutely does, because we know more about how diseases actually work, and we can set them up in a more realistic manner. You know, a science fictional plague has to have an element of unrealism because it's science fiction. That's what makes it fun. But also, if you are someone who is writing science fiction with a strong focus on epidemiology, with a strong attachment to plague, you do have a certain level of responsibility to be as accurate as possible and not help further real world conspiracy theories. You know, America has an incredible history of medical malfeasance. We are, as a culture, not awesome when it comes to not experimenting on our citizens, not awesome when it comes to full disclosure. It's not great. So there are valid reasons for some people in America, especially people who don't look like you or me, to be reluctant to take a new vaccine. And it's not because they are anti-science or because they bought into a conspiracy theory. It's because we've literally lined mothers of color up for a vaccination campaign that wasn't what we told them was in the vial. So if you're writing any kind of pandemic science fiction and you want it to be successful, I do think that it is not just unkind, it is genuinely wrong to write any kind of interference with the vaccine chain, just because you don't want to encourage people to think, oh no, I heard about it in real life and here it is in fiction, it's in multiple places, it must be true. And I know that sounds like I'm giving a lot of credit to fiction, but that is how people's brains work. We build a consensus reality for ourselves out of story. And sometimes the story is fictional and sometimes the story is Fox News. But science fiction does...
Go. I have a question.
So science fiction definitely does advance from plague to plague. We see more novelty, more accuracy in the virology. I Am Legend by Robert Matheson, which has been adapted to film many, many times, is one of our earliest truly successful works of plague science fiction. And in that, the plague is actually a variant of the Black Death. It is a Yersinia pestis bacterium that is carried by bats into England, because everything happens to England if you're writing in that particular era, and turns people into vampires. Hey, it's a party. And we've come a long way from there to say The Stand, which is the piece of pandemic science fiction that I think is best known globally. And The Stand is just a shifting antigen flu. Captain Trips would still do us some serious damage if it actually happened, but I think we would do much better with Captain Trips today than we would have at the time that The Stand was set, because we've really advanced our studies of the flu. And that's why you need to move on to things like Zika or COVID. When I built my most popular fictional virus, I actually started with a coronavirus, which has been super fun. Yay.
I was gonna ask you about feed. So is it okay to ask you, how would you approach a pandemic today? If you wanted to write something, Feed was written under the pseudonym Mira Grant, and it's awesome. And I listened to it. I listened to the audiobook. The audiobook is awesome. Maybe in the written form it's different, but I hope it's not. How would you approach it differently today? Like if you wanted to write a pandemic now?
Well, so one of the things about Feed that I think makes it effective is that you don't have to deal with the reaction to the pandemic. The pandemic happened in 2014. The books happen in 2035. So the pandemic happened. We survived it. A lot of things got really, really awful for a long time. And we see some of them in flashbacks and little bits, but for the most part, we don't wallow in it. And then we move on. Sarah Pinsker did something really, really similar recently with her book, A Song for a New Day, which is gorgeous, which eluded over the pandemic as much as possible. You're just kind of using it as an event. A lot of people died. Society changed. we're not going through the council meetings and the rebuilding and the boring parts of putting society back together, which in real life, obviously, we have to play through those in real time, and it sucks.
Sorry.
I actually would not have to change. I wouldn't have to change that much, because the thing with the virus in feed is it is released into the jet stream by people who break into the lab where it was developed. It's not a natural virus, so it is completely novel, but we know everything about it. So they can say accurately on day one, this is a novel virus and here are the facts, rather than what we've been dealing with, which is, again, in America right now, I hate bringing up the country I live in so often, but I think it does matter because otherwise I'm assuming the whole world is reacting like we do. In America right now, there is a very strong tendency, if I say, Karen has one cat because you've shown me one cat and you actually have 3 cats, to call me a liar, rather than just saying, no, Shannon didn't know that Karen had 3 cats. Shannon spoke to what she had seen. So in the early days of COVID-19, our epidemiologists would look at how the virus was behaving and would say, COVID-19 appears to do X, when COVID-19 actually did Y, and X was a side effect. And then the next day, people are like, oh my God, all the epidemiologists lied to us. They lied to us. They intentionally misled us. We can't trust them anymore because the science was developing. Do you get that in Israel?
No, Israel is perfect. Everybody trusts the epidemiologists. Everybody trusts the Ministry of Health. Everybody listens to us when they say, hey, look at the vaccine. It's here. Have it. It's safe. And I'm just...
Okay, then I'm coming to Israel.
Come to Israel. We have a better weather. But what
and
I was... and scorpions, right? It's perfect. And coffee. Actually, we have better coffee. I have to tell you. It's like... I'm thinking, while you were talking, I really like the part on feed. I'm trying to remember if it was on feed that they break into the CDC or if it was later. But the thing that I would change is make the virus a natural phenomena, like a natural mutation, and not created in a lab. Because one of the things that was most harmful in this in this pandemic is the notion that the virus was manipulated somehow, that it was man-made.
Oh yeah, no, that's been awful. I would have to stick, sadly, with the lab created because I needed a virus that made zombies.
Yeah, well,
and I don't think any natural virus is going to make zombies. But I do have a pandemic book I was working on when COVID-19 hit, that I'm going to pick back up in about a month and a half, that is about a naturally occurring plague. And that we're very strict on, no, it's natural. It just happened. It just happened.
I'm sorry. I just have to say that talking to someone who says, unfortunately, I needed a virus that could create zombies is so fun. Thank you for saying
that. But I did. That's just not going to happen in the real world. I'm sorry, other zombie authors. I love you. But I spent literally 5 years on the phone with the CDC, WHO, and USAMRIID. Half of the people that have been in the news here in the United States have my number on their speed dial still. Which, by the way, it turns out you take it weirdly personally when there's a pandemic going on and doctors that you have spoken to about virology, that you know how smart and cool and devoted they are to public health, are on the news being like, hey, this is what's going on. And you've got folks going, liar, liar, government plants, CCP, oh my God, evil. And I'm like, Dr. Fauci is the nicest man. Why would you say those things?
I can just tell you that being on the side that is pointed at and being accused at stuff is almost as fun. Just wonderful.
Yeah, no, I'm amazed that every epidemiologist in the world hasn't just snapped and started putting things in the water. Like, y'all are...
Well, I have a friend, and we came out with this secret plan of, no, but I can't tell you because we are. Well, I'll tell you later, maybe. We have another question from the audience. Do you think that I'm going to drop the most. Do you think future pandemic books will include more people behaving irrationally?
I think that's really going to depend on the book and what the author is trying to do. I think it's going to fall down gendered lines, honestly.
Oh.
You're going to get more men that feel like they can write books about pandemics where people behave really irrationally, and women are going to keep writing about the level of irrational behavior we have been writing. Because, and I say this as someone who has published, counting on my fingers here, 10 books about fictional pandemics that were not perfect, because there is no such thing as a completely perfect book, but were researched to the point where I gave copies again to the people I worked with at the CDC, and they didn't hit me. When you can give epidemiologists who deal with our government, who work in these things, copies of your books, and they go, that's really well done. That's an excellent argument for vaccination. Congratulations. You've done pretty well. And despite that, I still get at events like this, when they're held in person or virtually, people coming in and yelling at me because, I just felt like your villain's motivations were not strong enough. I don't think anybody would risk killing that many people for the sake of making sure that people understood what quarantine was. And just lots of critique that our male peers don't receive. So unfortunately, the science fiction and the science of women and gender nonconforming people is policed so incredibly tightly compared to our male peers that we're to be able to start including that level of irrationality for quite some time. It would hurt our sales, it would tank our reputations. We've got enough irrationality already going. And I would argue that especially if you read my pandemic books, read Kingdom of Needle and Bone. Don't read Kingdom of Needle and Bone. This is the single worst possible time the world has known during our lives to read Kingdom of Needle and Bone. I get hate mail now about Kingdom of Needle and Bone. Don't read Kingdom of Needle and Bone. But read Kingdom of Needle and Bone. People are real irrational. It's already there. We just haven't been focusing on it as hard.
I would like to take you, if it's okay, what is the role of the pandemic in the book? Because like everything else, it's supposed to have a role, right? I mean, it can't just exist.
I mean, the role of a pandemic in a book is the same as the role of a big storm or a pack of wolves. It's an environmental hazard. There's the joke that has become cliche about zombie work, where humans are the real monsters, and that's the message of zombie movies. Well, that is kind of the message of pandemic movies too. Almost every work of fiction about the pandemic has started with or focused in some way on a huge act of human selfishness. I love The Stand. It's one of my favorite books of all time. I think there's a perfect version of The Stand that exists somewhere between the 800-page version that they published initially and the 1,400-page version that they went and republished. I think if you could go in with a really fine-honed editor and cut it down to about 1,100 pages, you would have literally the most perfect book written in the last century. The Stand begins when an American Army employee working at Fort Detrick looks up from his terminal and sees that the numbers on the clock on the wall have gone red. Now, he's been working at a biotech research facility doing dark virology, doing underground, breaking a whole lot of national conventions virology. He knows that if the numbers on the clock go red, the room is supposed to lock down and keep him inside because something is loose in the facility and everybody's going to die. And his first reaction is irrational. It is not to go, I signed up for this, I drew a paycheck for this, I knew what was going to happen to me. It's to go, I feel fine. Maybe I haven't been exposed. I should get out of here and leave the base. And he runs out of the room, he flees the base, he makes it out just before the lockdown happens. And by that point, scientists are dropping like flies. So it takes a couple hours before the army realizes that he is out of the base. And he's able to get to his house and get his wife and infant child into the car. And his flight across the United States is what sets the entire pandemic that wipes out 99.5% of the human race into motion. It is a phenomenal act of irrational human selfishness. You know, something like Night of the Living Dead, where the dead rise everywhere and it's just everywhere right at once, you get to shortcut parts of that human selfishness. And that's why I went that route in Feed with having, there is no patient zero, it's just everywhere. Because otherwise you do have to ask yourself, why did Karen get exposed to the aerosolized flesh eater and go home? Why did Shannon decide to pick up the dead squirrel and then go home? You know, why did people make these very human decisions that very much impacted everyone around them? And the answer is people. We're not rational. You know, you're drinking coffee. I am drinking Diet Dr. Pepper. Both of these things contain chemicals that are not optimal to our functionality or long-term survivability, but they make us happy now. So we're going to do it.
I just have to say that without coffee, I will not function in the long run. So
exactly. You know, they are good for our short-term functionality. We don't always make the most rational choices, and that is part of humanity. That's part of the mammalian condition. You know, my cats don't always make the most rational choices either. Every time you start speaking Hebrew, Elsie starts singing because she thinks that you're Batya and we're attending Shabbos dinner, and she's learned that if she sings during Shabbos, she actually gets treats. So,
I can say Hebrew things. I'm gonna go quickly. Okay, I'm going to say it in Hebrew, that I'm going to go over the questions quickly and pick something up for us. אני הולכת לעבור על השאלות עכשיו מהקהל שרצות לנו בצד.
Oh, yes, you're excited.
Yeah, she's happy. Nobody's ever been happy for me to speak in Hebrew. Okay. Okay, so there are some personal questions. I'll let you decide if you want to answer them or not. But I would pick this one though. What do you think are the implications regarding privacy or other dystopian themes? And I love these questions because one of the things that we had that ignited a huge debate in Israel is the privacy issue. If we can monitor who was where by just pinpointing where the cell phones were, so we can quarantine people, we can identify people and make sure that they will not spread the disease further, but we are violating their privacy. Where do we draw the line? And it was huge here. It still is an ongoing debate. And it's actually really interesting. I would love to hear what you think about it.
I mean, it is actually, we're having the same debate here. Part of it is a hilarious to me, but I can understand why it is not funny to a lot of people, belief in the United States that the COVID vaccine was developed by Bill Gates and contains a microchip that is going to allow the government to track people at all times. And it's like, okay, one, do you understand how big any kind of microchip actually is? You hear the word micro and you think it's like a blood cell. You can feel the microchips in each of my cats. You can find them. A needle that was going to stick a microchip in you would be like a turkey baster. You'd know. But most of the people who tell me this heard about it on Facebook, which they are on 27 hours a day because their phones are basically strapped to their hands. If you have a cell phone, the government can track you. If your concern is that they're going to vaccinate you against a deadly disease so that you don't kill people, and then they'll be able to track you, I'm pretty sure the not killing people with a deadly disease is a bonus on something they can already do. But it's a very valid question. The implications regarding privacy, other cyberpunky dystopian themes. I understand why people don't want to be tracked. I do. If we could be trusted, we wouldn't have to be. You know, if people would actually start disclosing who we saw and stop thinking, oh, that person doesn't count. My own mother went to a big American Thanksgiving and then had to quarantine for 2 weeks because I wouldn't go near her. And part of why I had to quarantine rather than trusting that she had stayed in the car or something was she will not refuse to hug her friends because she doesn't want them to think that she doesn't trust them. And in America, we have this very strong correlation between disease and dirtiness. If you have a disease, you're dirty. If I think that you might infect me with something, I'm saying that you're dirty. It's a gentleman's hands are never dirty. And so if I refuse to hug you, if I like teleport into your room, Karen, I'm in the living room right now and I want a big hug without masks on, and you won't give me one.
No.
Yeah, if you won't give me one, you're saying I'm dirty. You're saying I'm a dirty, dirty person. That is not true. That is not the case. So if people would actually write down voluntarily, this is where I've been, this is what I've done, this is who I've seen, we wouldn't need to be tracking and tracing. I like the opt-in COVID tracking applications. I have one on my phone so that if I come into contact with someone whose phone later says positive COVID test, I'll be notified. But that also implies much more of a testing infrastructure than we have here. My concern, and it is a concern, is that we will not dismantle these apparati after the pandemic is passed, not in the sense of keeping them for the next pandemic, but in the sense of, I am totally fine with during an airborne pandemic, the government knowing everywhere I go, everyone I'm anywhere near, because I'd like to live. Living through this is a big goal of mine. I don't want, after this is over, when we're back to a semi version of reality, the government to be like, hey, why is she in a backstage cast only area at Disney World? She doesn't work for them. And catching me because I've snuck over the fence again. So I think that we're going to see some more privacy erosion. Anyone who says that people who are not comfortable with this have something to hide is kind of right, because we all have something to hide. I don't want you in my bathroom.
I don't want to be in your bathroom.
Able to wander around my house sans trousers. And no, that's good. Actually, I think you'd like my bathroom. It's got lionfish painted all over the walls.
Oh, okay, then I will come. But is it okay if I come there and we won't hug? Okay. I don't hug people now.
No hugs. My favorite thing about this pandemic, and I know it's weird to have a favorite thing, but it is a genuinely favorite thing. And we had an audience question about a recent trend of gender-based plagues. Do you think this is or will be affected by COVID? As a woman who does a lot of science fiction events, I have had to get used to the idea that I am free range for people that want to touch me. Like, random convention attendees will just come up and they'll be, oh my gosh, it's so nice to actually see you. Oh, how are you doing? And they'll touch any exposed area of skin. They avoid swimsuit zones, which is how it's not sexual harassment. But I'm like, I'm not a very touchy person. I don't want you to touch me. And I'm really excited about the idea that once COVID is over, that's not going to be societally normal for at least a while. So I'll be able to just like, nope, I'm sorry, I don't do handshakes. I do hand sanitizer. Super fun. Yay. So the thing about gender-based plagues is that they are very frequently societally reductive and extremely transphobic in a lot of manifestations. You know, we killed all the men and we're defining men as has a penis and testicles. I know people who are chromosomally male because of intersex conditions that don't have a penis and testicles. I know people who were born with a penis and testicles who have had them surgically removed. And I know people who are men, have a high testosterone level in their body and have been living as men for 20 years who do not have a penis and testicles. Which of these people have died? You know, there are diseases that impact different tissues differently. So you will get diseases that attack ovaries, testicles, breast tissue, whatever. But those diseases don't know the difference between hormone replacement and naturally generated hormones. They don't know if you're cisgender. They don't know if you're paragender. They don't know what's going on. They're diseases. They're just doing their shit. So I'm actually kind of hoping that we're going to move away from the gender-based plagues again, because the gender-based plagues are frequently so problematic and they're so scientifically shaky that there's not a really...
I can't think of a single disease that would, biological disease, I'm not talking about, you know, society, but I can't think of a single disease that is gender-based. Because what would you attack?
Yeah, everyone's got all the same bits. They're just arranged differently.
Yeah.
The closest I can really come up with is Zika, because the attacks on the female reproductive system are so interesting. Like, it does attack the testicles, but it clears out of the sperm inside of 6 months. There have been permanent changes to the ovaries of women who were affected. But that's not gender-based, that's just gender impacts.
No, I can think about different, I don't know, a disease that attacks the Y chromosome. I can think of diseases that attack like genetically based diseases or organ-based diseases, but gender is weird.
Yeah, gender is just not really a party.
No.
It's not happening. Like, viruses do not care, y'all. Viruses don't have gender. Well, viruses don't have gender, so they're not targeting gender. They're just doing their little virological thing, invading our cells and turning them into factories. It is the ultimate industrial revolution happening inside your body all the time.
I do. Wait, you know what? You're right. There is gender. The thing is that diseases have different effects on gender, because people from different genders are... one of the major effects on our society right now is how people who had to work from home, and then in where you have kids, somebody had to take care of the kids, and that like you saw the gap. But other than that,
yeah, the reaction to disease is impacted by gender, but the disease itself is not. And we're saying gender rather than sex because it is gender. If you are a female presenting person, you are more likely to have had more of the housework, more of the childcare put on you. And it is hurting the careers of female academics very badly because they can't keep up the publication schedule. You know, so that's a party time. We got our 5-minute notice.
Yes, we did. I was going to say that, but you're a better person than me, so obviously. Do you want to recommend books? Do you want to tell the people who are watching and have trouble writing something encouraging, like whatever, or answer anything else that you saw here?
We are all, 100% of us, whether you are in the worst possible living situation, in which case, how are you on this Zoom, or the best possible, we are all living through trauma right now. We are all living through a gigantic, global, generational impacting trauma. If you're not writing at the tempo that you think you should be writing, if you're not productive the way that you think you should be productive, you are doing perfectly. You are still surviving. You know, I know that people are starting to say that more as we're hitting the end of the year, but it's very true. Everyone's productivity is down, except for the guy whose wife has picked up 100% of the slack around him. And her productivity is in the toilet. It's okay if you're not writing right now. It's okay if you need to take this time to put your mind back together as everything is going awful all around you. You have to plant. You can't reap if you don't plant. And we're not planting very much right now because we can't get out there to plow the fields. And that's an agrarian metaphor because, hey, I'm in America, land of agrarians. But books to recommend, if you're looking for good books about pandemics that are not necessarily completely depressing, I would look for Sarah Pinsker's A Song for a New Day, which is very prescient in some ways to the way that society is reacting to this particular pandemic. It's a beautifully done book. M.K. Carey's The Girl with All the Gifts, which is a fungal pandemic. It's a zombie pandemic again. He uses cordyceps very, very nicely. Not necessarily hopeful, but it's beautiful. And I would heartily recommend The Stand by Stephen King. It is a classic of our genre for a reason. It's got some aspects that have not aged well from a societal standpoint, but the virology still holds up. The societal reaction, y'all wanted irrational behavior. You will get plenty of irrational behavior out of The Stand. And, you know, it's a new TV show on CBS All Access over here. So if you like it, you've got more options for standy goodness.
I'm going to say that The Stand was translated. You can find it, המדע, של Stephen King. The Girl with All the Gifts was translated, הנערה עם כל המתנות, תורגם נפלא על ידי איריס בוסקו. You can find it as well. Sarah Pinsker wasn't translated yet. I hope maybe she will soon. I'm going to be promoting. I would have to tell you that the Shonnon books are wonderful, and you should read them because some of them makes your heart go explode with warmth and love. And although
sometimes it's tapeworms.
And she's a wonderful person, and you want to give her all your money, so buy all of her books, please, twice. And I want so much. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I love it. I think that one of the most best things that happened from COVID is the ability to do this, to have you in Maaouros and to have you as our special guest. And
it has been really nice watching people figure out that, wait, geography doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
But no, thank you for having me. I could talk about plagues with you for days.
Yes, we'll do a Plague for Days Zoom one
there
day.
We go.
Thank you all for listening to us. I hope you will enjoy. We have some awesome things going on. We have Karen Lavachi coming in soon, talking about War Child and other books and Q&As and stuff. And we have other lectures with awesome people. So you should totally stay on the channel and keep on watching. And thank you all for being here and asking questions and being awesome.
Have a wonderful day. Thanks for coming by. Stay safe, wear your mask.